Welcome back to Let's Suggest. Today we're gonna take a look at the Panasonic TZ90 and the Sony HX99. These two cameras are often compared to one another simply because they both have the flippy screen. And because they are two compact cameras, they can both do 4K, they are often compared to one another. So I'm gonna share with you my experience when it comes to actually using them, especially for video. I'm Aleloy, this is Let's Suggest, and let's get this video started. I will start this video by listing the things that these two cameras have in common. They both have a flippy screen, as we said before. They both have the same zoom range with 24 to 720 millimeters, so it's a pretty massive power zoom, both of them. They both shoot in 4K. They both have this annoying tripod screw mount that is placed in a way that if you actually are mounting your quick release plate or even your tripod really, you're not gonna be able to open the battery lid, which is super annoying. Although there is a quirk for both of them. For the Sony HX99, I made a specific video about it, so you will find it here. When it comes to instead the Panasonic TZ90, because the screw is slightly distant from the battery lid, you may be able to get around if you're getting one of those very small Arca Swiss plates. Both cameras are hassle for this, but yes, there is a sort of a workaround for both. Both cameras have custom modes, so you can save all your settings and then you can just switch modes and it will go back to it. For instance, for the Sony HX99, I have C1 set to 4K 30 frames per second with all my white balance and the things I use in the studio. And then when I switch to C2, then it goes to slow motion, full HD 120 frames per second. Super useful. You can do the same with the Panasonic TZ90. Although the advantage of the Sony HX99 is that you have actually the custom mode 1 and the custom mode 2 on the dial, so it's really matter of just switching the dial. Unfortunately, the camera will ask you to confirm your choice and then you're good to go. With the Panasonic TZ90, instead you have the custom mode on the dial, but it's only one, and then once you're there you can decide if you want C1, C2, C3. I think it's 3 custom settings that you can save here and 2 custom settings that you can save on the Sony HX99. But this camera have full manual control over video as well as over pictures, so you can change the exposure, your focus, everything completely fully manual, both in picture and in video mode. Both these cameras have micro USB and you're allowed to charge your camera while you're using it. So pretty much once these things are on and hooked up with your USB, you can let them running all over, which is really handy. Also, both these cameras have a control ring in the front, which is kind of useful in case you want to do your manual focus or playing the focus in videos. Otherwise, I cannot find any usability of the control ring here on the front, simply because rotating the dial on the back or rotating this dial on the front, they are so tiny and fiddly that, to be fair, it doesn't really make a big difference. Better having than not having it, I suppose. Okay, so I'm gonna share with you a couple of samples I took, and this is the comparison I did when it comes to low light. You can have an idea and judge by yourself. Okay, this is our low light test. I'm shooting right now in 4K, 30 frames per second. Shutter speed is 1/60. The aperture is 3.3 on the Panasonic and 3.5 on the Sony. Both the cameras, I'm just using the widest aperture you can have. Right now, the ISO is set to 800 on both the cameras. As you can see, there is a slight crop when I'm shooting in 4K on the Panasonic. I would want the ISO to be in automatic, to be honest, but unfortunately the Panasonic does not allow you to have the ISO in automatic unless you have also the shutter speed or any other value in automatic mode. I'm shooting with the same settings, but now I've increased the ISO to 1600. And from the screens, I can see that the Sony is way less noisy than the Panasonic camera. Still need to see this and the big screen. I am using a standard picture profile for both the cameras, so ideally this should be fair. This was instead a test that I've done to see how the two cameras compare when it comes to stabilization. Okay, I'm testing the stabilization of the two cameras. I am now using the same settings. I'm outside shooting in 4K. Stabilization is gonna be limited on both of the cameras, especially the Sony that does not have active stabilization. This is
how it looks like. Okay, so now instead filming in full HD. So the active stabilizer of the Sony is now on. So full HD, this is the way it looks like.
These are instead a couple of pictures I took. And now with those samples out of the way, I want to focus the video on things that I believe are advantages to the Panasonic TZ90 and things that I believe are advantages to the Sony HX99. When it comes to the Sony HX99, probably the biggest advantage over the Panasonic is the lightweight factor. This camera is incredibly lightweight. I mean, it's a very small too, but I don't know if being small is actually an advantage of the Sony HX99, simply because to me this camera is too fiddly and it's got everything, you know, everything you would want. It's got a viewfinder. When you actually pull this one up, the camera powers up on its own. You got your flash, you got your control ring, you got all the buttons you may want on a camera this big, and it's got a grip as well, so it's I don't know, to me this is too small and it's sort of something that I feel like I will drop at some point. I feel like I could do with something a little bit bigger, just a bigger grip or a bigger thumb grip here on the back. Now the Sony HX99 does not have a crop in 4K, which I believe is a great thing, especially considering that this lens is 24mm, is extending of course up to 720mm, which is crazy, but what I'm trying to say, 24mm full frame equivalent is actually plenty wide, and you could absolutely get away most of your shot situation with this lens, especially considering that there is no crop, so you have a 24mm full frame equivalent, which is great. Once you have your active stabilization on, this camera is incredibly smooth for just a digital stabilizer. I really loved it, but unfortunately this is only available in full HD, so if you're shooting in 4K it's not as smooth, but still you have the standard image stabilizer. It's a shame you cannot get the advantage of the active state because that is really smooth. Now what was for me the biggest advantage of the Sony HX99 is that this camera does a very decent slow motion with a full HD that can shoot at 120 frames per second. You also don't have any limitations whatsoever. I loved it. For a camera so small and fairly cheap, I must admit it's not the best ever, but you have the great advantage of having a massive zoom, and it's something that you could have in your backpack or in your pocket all the time basically. So it's very useful to take this odd slow motion that otherwise you wouldn't take, unless you have a smartphone that obviously can do slow motion, but smartphones are a little bit fiddly to mess around with colors and things that keep changing all the time. So having a camera that is so small, that is allowing you to do full manual control and doing the slow motion, and you can save all these settings in C2 as I did, it's just mind-blowing. You just power on the camera, put it to C2, you're ready to shoot in slow motion. Your shutter speed will be already 180 degrees, so you can follow the mirror rule, and you're just good to go. This is, I believe, the biggest selling point of this camera. This can be easily your pocketable slow motion box to have with you wherever you go. It's the price of a lens, of a cheap zoom lens, but you also have the benefit that this is actually a secondary camera. Another great advantage of the Sony HX99 is that it's got clean HDMI out. Although they placed the HDMI port in a very unfortunate position, is just right next to the tripod screw, so it's basically impossible to use it. Although I figured it out, so if you're interested in this fix, I was able to use it and mount it on a tripod, so I made a video about it. You will find it up here or here. I'm still confused. Where do they go? You'll find it here somewhere. So with the clean HDMI out, this can be turned into the smallest streaming camera that can do 4K. And with the flippy screen, you can pretty much place this thing anywhere you want because it's also very lightweight. You will be able to see yourself, you will be able to stream 4K in standby, and it's a big deal. Now, I love the display of the Sony HX99. I believe everything about it is just right. The Panasonic tries to be as good, and it is good, but there is a big downside on the Panasonic TZ90, which is that once you have the tilted screen, if you just move the screen a little bit, you tilt it just a little bit, this will be enough for the screen to be reverted back as if you were looking the screen in this position. This is kind of annoying, but it's not a deal breaker. You need to get used to reading the menus upside down. I'm talking obviously if you're using this camera for overhead shots or in odd angles when you have the camera mounted high there. It's sort of a bummer that you cannot have the screen this way and read the menus right. The Sony instead just handles that perfectly. Can have the screen like this and read it all the time. It's just amazing. Everything about this screen is just perfect. Okay, what about the advantages of the Panasonic TZ90? Well, I'm gonna start obviously with price. The price point is cheaper than the Sony HX99, so for maybe a secondary camera or something that you want to carry around for traveling, you maybe don't want to spend too much money. Well, this has got the same zoom, pretty much it does the same things that this camera does, so I would say the biggest advantage is that you will save some money. Then the other advantage, I believe, is the grip. I really love the grip of this camera, and I believe having a positive grip experience on a compact camera is everything, because you want a camera that you can handle with one hand. You want to feel safe. I would absolutely feel safe to go around with this camera with no strap. You can have it in selfie mode and portrait mode, in landscape mode. They always feel right, and you can even have your thumb underneath the display. It feels even better. And the viewfinder as well is just placed right the way it is. You don't need to mess around with the button and the viewfinder coming up. The user experience, the touch and feel experience of the Panasonic TZ90 is so much better, in my opinion. As well as the camera is made out of magnesium, if I'm not mistaken, and just feels more solid. It feels like something pretty robust. It can handle some bad behavior on it. And I believe this is what you want to do with your compact camera. You don't want to be paranoid about this thing that maybe it's not gonna resist even your trip. You want to come back with something that is still alive. You can still use it for your next trip, or at least you can do the full trip with it. Now, another great advantage of the Panasonic TZ90 is that this camera can do 4K, as well as this camera can do 4K, but the Sony HX99 can only shoot 4K for up to 5 minutes. Come on, 5 minutes! When I figured this out, I was so disappointed I had to go ahead and buy this camera. I'm shooting everything 4K right now, and 5 minutes means keep pressing. So this camera can do 15 minutes in 4K, which is quite a lot more. With 15 minutes you can get by, although I believe it's still annoying. I'm sure Panasonic could have done at least 30 minutes because this camera does not overheat, and this is another positive of this camera. I was never able to get this camera to overheat, and this Sony HX99 overheats pretty much all the time if you shoot in 4K. So bear that in mind. If you need a camera that is not only a travel companion, but something that actually needs to be shooting maybe in the studio as a secondary camera, this is your way to go. Absolutely. If you're shooting in 4K, if you're shooting full HD, it's fine, because both these cameras can do full HD. I believe they have a limit of 30 minutes, so full HD is fine, but 4K, that's the way to go. Now, this camera is also a full SD card, whether the Sony HX99 has got a micro SD card. If you have all your cards full-size SD cards, then again, this may be a big positive for you as well. Now, this may be not important to some, but for me, it's like a life-changing. This camera has a recording limit of 15 minutes, as we said before. This camera has a recording limit of 5 minutes, as we said before. Now, the thing is that the Panasonic will make a beep sound when it stops recording, when it reaches the 15 minutes. And you know, okay, I need to press record again, Otherwise, you're just believing that you're still filming. Especially at the beginning, I didn't know this camera had a 5 minutes limit recording in 4K. I was keep talking by myself, and then I was like, why does it always stop? And then I found out, okay, there is a recording limit which is so intensely crippling the camera. But this camera will let you know, hey, I stopped, so you can just press that record button again. Now, another advantage to the Panasonic TZ90 is that the app for smartphone is just amazing. Panasonic app is just the best in my honest opinion. I've tried a few different apps for different cameras, and I believe it's the only camera brand that just got it right. I'm specifically talking Android. I never tried the Apple counterpart, but there's nothing like this app. It's amazing. You can just see everything, control everything from it. I just love it. Okay, so this pretty much summarizes whatever were my feelings, my experience with these two cameras. Is there an absolute best? Well, no. To be fair, if you're all about quality, perhaps you should go with the Sony HX99. But again, there are many compromises there. You will need to do very short clips in 4K. So if you are primarily doing pictures or shooting in full HD for the most part, then yeah, this camera is good enough. Although it's a bit fiddly, something that, I don't know, my feelings are that it may break much sooner than as if you would go around with the TZ90. Although the TZ90 is substantially heavier than the Sony HX99, so you may end up not bringing this camera around simply because it's also a little bit bulkier as well. So if you're all about absolute compactness and quality, and you're interested in having a slow motion in full HD, then Sony HX99 is your companion. Bear in mind that the Panasonic also does slow motion, but it's not fantastic. Then if you instead need a secondary camera, I believe the Panasonic TZ90 will be your studio secondary or backup camera, and it is also something that you may want to carry with you around when you're traveling, or simply maybe you don't have a zoom on your main camera, you prefer to have another camera that can do power zoom and it's got a decent stabilization. You can do a bit of videos in 4K as well. I mean, for that sort of stuff as a B cam or even a C cam, the Panasonic TZ90 I believe is a better option, simply because the recording limit of the Sony HX99 is just not enough. And don't ever think that you will get it and you will set the temperature too high, as most of the Sony cameras you will set the temperature too high and you will get beyond the 5 minutes. No, this camera is just 5 minutes straight. But again, if you instead need a second camera for an angle while you're live streaming, then this camera is a beast because you can have the clean HDMI out. I was able to achieve around 45 minutes with this trick of getting the HDMI port cleaned when you are mounting this on a tripod. 45 minutes is not too bad. I'm talking about 4K. So for streaming, definitely this is your way, because this camera's got a HDMI port, but it streams only the playback. It does not stream the video while you're recording, nor the video while you're in standby. So it's pretty much a useless port if you ask me. So hopefully you made your mind about this camera so far. If this video was useful in any way, comment, say hello, hi, thank you, whatever you feel in whatever language you like. Also, if you have some specific questions, something that I didn't cover during this video, you can feel free to ask. If I know it, I will answer, otherwise maybe somebody else will. If you're interested to get any of these cameras, I'm just gonna share the links below. Those are affiliate links, so I will earn a very small commission if you buy any of these two cameras, but you will pay exactly the same. Don't forget to press that like button and subscribe if you find this content useful. Maybe you want to stay around. I will publish more of this content, so you don't want to miss out any of those hacks or any of this comparison. They may save your life, who knows. I'm Aleloy, this is Ale Suggest, audio and video suggestions for the creative mind, and I will see you here very soon.